Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and welcome back to another live session on my Declassified Caribbean Network. This afternoon, we are going to be having a very challenging discussion, challenging the many assumptions people have about global power, geopolitics, religion, and influence in the modern world. When most people think about power, they think about presidents, armies, elections, and corporations. But what if some of the most important forces shaping the world operate far beyond what the public normally sees? What if religion, intelligence networks, financial interests, and geopolitical alliances are far more interconnected than most people realize? From Washington to Tel Aviv, to the Vatican rather, powerful institutions continue to shape global narratives, conflicts, diplomacy, and international policy. Yet many questions remain. Who truly influences the direction of the modern world? How much power do religious institutions still hold? And are we entering a new era of global control and instability? Joining us today is Kevin Annett, a former United Church, and let me get him on the stage here. Oh, wow. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, Andrew. No, thanks for having me.
Yes. And allow me to just introduce you as before we begin formal the program. So now today we are going to be joined by Mr. Kevin Annett, a former United Church minister, author, researcher, and longtime human rights activist, known internationally for his investigations into institutional abuse, church power, and the hidden relationship between religion, politics, and global systems of influence. His work has sparked intense debate and controversy over the years, particularly because he has challenged some of the most powerful institutions in the world. This afternoon, we'll explore the United States, Israel, the Vatican, and the hidden quest for global power. Thank you so much, Mr. Kevin Annett, for joining us today, and we hope that we will have a stimulating conversation. I'm happy that you were able to join us.
Thank you.
Yes. Is there something that I did not mention about you that you wish to inform our audience?
Well, I've just been involved in a 30-year campaign exposing Vatican crimes and their role historically and in ongoing genocide. So there's a lot to describe we can get into, I'm sure.
Yes. And I'm thank you, because one of the things is that in the media, we tend to focus a lot on Israel. People are talking about the Zionism, which of course has a legitimate role in terms of what they're doing in the world, but nobody is really placing a lot of attention on the Vatican. And why do you think that is so?
Well, I mean, partly it's the historic camouflage around religion. And the fact that with its huge financial resources, the Vatican can create any image of itself it likes. And also the extreme ideological hold it has on over 1 billion people on the planet. So all of that people, politicians are worried about Catholic voters. There's something which we can talk about is called the financial concordats, which are secret agreements between over 100 governments and the Vatican Bank, whereby taxpayers' money is channeled right into the Vatican Bank without people's knowledge. And so with that kind of power behind it, they can create any kind of smokescreen around their activity. The Vatican Bank is a secret society. You can't even know, who its officers are. And there's no audit ever done on it. So it's historically, as we know, the most criminal bodies in history are surrounded by the most secrecy and fog.
Yes. And do you think that Zionism, where do you see Zionism and who created that? Because is that something that has been newly created, or has it been around for a long time?
Well, officially, Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement in the late 1800s was definitely founded with British subsidies because they had an interest in having a client state in the Middle East for their burgeoning oil interests. And the destruction of the Ottoman Empire and how France and Britain then carved up the Mideast. Israel obviously had a role in their mind in securing that, but it evolved, as things do, into much more than that. So, yeah, in a nutshell.
Yes, and what role did the Jesuits, for example? I understand that the gentleman who created Israel, who was behind the creation of Israel as a nation, was influenced by Jesuits. Is that true, or is it that just conspiracy theory?
I'm not sure specifically about that case, but I know that Jesuit, as the military arm and a big financial arm of the Vatican, has played a role for many centuries in propping up regimes. The system we found over here in North America, where traditional native chiefs were destroyed and puppet chiefs were brought in, Catholic chiefs were brought in. They were always Jesuit trained. That was an old practice in Europe, where you take the children of a monarch and train them, like the British did in India and Africa, where they would bring, rulers' children to Cambridge and Oxford and train them as loyal agents of the British Empire. And then they would go back and administer the empire in their own countries. So that's that same process. The Jesuits were very adept in doing that. Right?
Yes, yes. Now, when people think about global power, they usually think about governments and militaries, and they will say what President Trump is doing and what Biden is doing, and they place this awful and this inordinate attention on these people. But how important are religious institutions like the Vatican in shaping world affairs?
Well, one aspect of power, of course, is legitimacy, and no power, even the most brutal dictatorship in the world, has to retain some semblance of legitimacy for it to continue. And that's historically the role of religion. And when you look, my background actually was in archaeology and anthropology. And when you look at the rise of the state thousands of years ago, it was alongside the temple, whereby the priestly caste legitimated the rulers in power. And the church and state have always been really the same organism from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
One legitimating the other and one protecting the other. So that it plays an enormous role, in terms of keeping a population in control, right?
Yes. Now, do you believe the relationship between the United States and Israel is purely strategic and political, or is there also a strong ideological and religious dimension?
Well, I think, of course, because of the large Jewish population in America and the lobbying power it has. But don't forget, there are a lot of American Jews who don't support Zionism.
Right.
And as a pragmatic measure after World War II, a lot of them supported the state of Israel, but not subsequently. You've got a lot of opposition within America, among American Jews and elsewhere in the world to Zionism.
Yes. Now, how would you define Zionism? Because there are people who are, people sometimes just say, oh, the Jews. How do you define it? And do you think that it has a political, economic, religious definition, or is it just one definition?
Definitely a political definition, in the same way that in Islam and Catholicism, it's really a political force. It's religion made into a political power. And, the philosophy behind religion is fine. It all sounds very good. But in practice, it's the most effective way to mobilize people militarily and politically is through that ideological hegemony of a religion. So, it definitely has that, as we can see all the time.
Yes. Now, you have been following the United States politics for a very long time. And the Vatican, as you can see in the last election, the election of President Trump, that the Catholic Church was very instrumental in the election of Donald J. Trump. The newspapers of the United States cited that. Could you elucidate, sir, more on that, the influence of Roman Catholicism on the election of Donald J. Trump of the United States?
Well, there was one Catholic cardinal in particular, Timothy Dolan of New York, who Trump wanted in as Pope, and he was the one who mobilized a lot of the support. As a matter of fact, one of the things we've discovered is that he diverted over $300 million from Catholic relief funds into Trump's campaign and into the whole Neuralink experiments that Elon Musk is involved in. There's a strong connection with the bioweaponry research and Vatican funding. So they played a direct role. And, when you see popes getting up addressing both houses of Congress, when officially there's supposed to be a separation of church and state, obviously it's quite blatant and out of the open, right? I actually go into a lot of that in my book here, Dethroning a Rogue Power, where I define kind of the nature of the Vatican and its ties. And you can get that on Amazon.
Yeah, right. So that was dethroning the.
Dethroning the rogue.
Dethroning
the
a
World
Rogue
Power.
Power. For those of you who want a book to buy, that's a very interesting book to read about that. Very, very, it shelves to you what is happening in the world at present. Go ahead, Mr. Annett.
Oh, simply that it's interesting. A Jesuit actually designed the original plan for the District of Columbia, where the capital is. And from the very beginning, I mean, one of the main instigators of the Declaration of Independence was a Catholic cardinal. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I'll remember. But so from the very beginning,
I read it in The Rulers of Evil. Did you read that book, The Rulers of Evil? I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, it started with a C. But anyway, and also a lot of the Masonic imagery in the early American Revolutionary flags, like the "Don't Tread on Me" symbol of the snake, Benjamin Franklin, the others being 33rd degree Mason leader for Masons and that. So, and of course, one of the reasons they assassinated Pope John Paul I in 1978 was he was investigating the Masonic lodges within the College of Cardinals in Rome and the role of the mafia and the Vatican Bank and all that. So he was dead after 28 days in office.
Wow. Now, when you look also at the recent conflict between the verbal spat, I should say, between President Trump and Pope Leo XIV, what did you make of that? Well, how would you unpack that sort of interaction between both powerful men, perhaps the two most powerful men on the planet?
Well, it's interesting, Andrew, because the present Pope, he's referred to among the cardinals as the second Latin American Pope, because although he's an American, he did all his work in South America and Peru as missionary.
Yes.
And he is playing the role Francis did before him, which is to enable Chinese penetration and take over a lot of the economic infrastructure and resources of the Western Hemisphere. He's doing in South America what Francis or Jorge Bergoglio did in North America, underwriting Chinese to up to $1 trillion every year to buy up the oil and gas, all the road, what they call the Road and Belt Initiative, where they're grabbing all the transportation systems all over the world, all the ports on the West Coast. They're all Chinese owned now with Vatican funding. So he represents that kind of pro-China lobby within the Vatican, because a lot of the Vatican funds are going now into the BRICS alliance, where all the economic growth in the world is happening in the Indo-Pacific region, right? So, yeah, I mean, financially, politically, it makes sense for them to be doing that from their point of view, right?
Wow. Now, when we look also at the fact that the Chinese, people think of the Chinese as non-religious people. So for them to hear that the Vatican is supporting the Chinese, it sounds rather bizarre. Now, could you tell us also how that impact is strengthening the Catholic Church when they invest in China and what the Chinese are doing in the Western world?
Well, I often joke with people that the Vatican is the largest atheistic organization on the planet, because if you really believed in an unseen deity, you wouldn't have $1 billion organization and have one man who they basically worship. The Pope is considered God's representative on earth. And the thing about China is that whether it's the Confucian or the Maoist tradition, they have a very hierarchical notion of basically of emperor worship, which parallels and mirrors the Vatican very closely. Their power structure and their ideology is very similar, that you have an emperor figure and everyone goes along with it, and there's no such thing as free, independence, inherent liberties, common law, any of that. So they're natural bed partners, if you like, China and the Vatican.
Yes, right. Now, the Chinese are also, we're hearing that the Chinese are America's enemies, and oftentimes we view them as such. But when we look behind the scenes, we realize that both elites work together and to accomplish whatever agenda they're planning for. Could you unpack that for us in terms of, when we think of countries, do we think of the people, or do we think of the leaders or the global and domestic elites?
Well, we had no better example of that than what's happened over the last few days. Remember, Trump was over in Beijing meeting Xi Jinping. And 2 days after that, and this was in the news all over the place here in Canada, America nullified their defense agreement with Canada, which has been in place for 85 years, since World War II. And that was a defense not only joint defense production in their military, but a pledge to defend each other in times of war. Well, America's pulled out of that now, in effect saying, well, if China wants to take over the country, we're not bound by treaty anymore to defend Canada. And I think that's a very ominous sign that America's made a deal with China to kind of carve up the world more, including Canada.
Yes. Now, Kevin, can you tell us why do you think discussions involving the Vatican, Israel, and global influence are often considered controversial or sensitive topics?
I think at a young age, children in any culture are conditioned to obey authority. And there's, when people claim that they represent God, there's no greater authority in people's minds. So even atheists I know are hesitant to confront the churches. We found that when we began our campaign in Canada over many years ago to confront the Catholic and Protestant murder of Native children in these Indian schools, generations of thousands of children killed. And they wouldn't come and protest at the churches. They thought, well, they have the right to have their worship. And I said, no, this is about a corporation hiding behind a cross that's grabbed lands, grabbed resources, committed genocide, right? And still there's a hesitance about confronting religion. Well, that's a great concealment by which crime and all sorts of money laundering can go on and they get away with it, right?
What made you become sensitive about the Vatican? Because, well, I'm Seventh-day Adventist, by the way. So, by virtue of that, the Adventist Church has been preaching for many years about the Catholic faith. But you are not Seventh-day Adventist. You are a non-Seventh-day Adventist. How did you become aware of the dark nature of the Roman Catholic papacy?
Well, within our family, my name Annett, we were French Huguenots originally. We had to flee France because we were burned out of there in the 1500s. So I joke with people, it's personal between me and the Vatican because our family has experienced the persecution ourselves. But as a Protestant minister on the west coast of Canada, I had firsthand contact with the survivors of not only these crimes committed largely by the Catholic Church, but also how it's an ongoing crime. There's a policy, and I talk about that in this book. There's a policy called Crim and Solicitanis in the Catholic Church that's been in place for over 100 years. And it says when children are harmed, raped, or harmed in any way, no one is to tell the police. It's a criminal conspiracy to protect child rapists within the church. That's institutionalized crime. And when you see this happening all around you, you see the extent to which they get away with this crime. You've got to be a fool or a blind person to not realize that, this is the biggest fraud in history goes on behind, the guys at the Church of Rome. So, and the biggest crime, when you do the body count.
Yes. But the problem is that our school system is not educating us about that. Many people are leaving and they have no idea how Rome is influential in politics. They see her just involved in religion. And I'm happy you said that the Catholic Church at the highest level, not at the level of where people worship and go to church on Sundays, but at the highest level, they are atheists. The Pope is atheistic, is not religious in any sense of the biblical sense of the word being religion. So how is it that we are going to sensitize ourselves to these topics when in our school systems, we are being desensitized not to look at the Vatican? We need to look at Israel. We need to look at our politicians and the corporations. How are we going to educate people about what's happening?
We have to educate the teachers first and find ways of homeschool our own children and teach them these things. And this book was actually written for people at the United Nations to say they have no right to be at the UN at all. They're not a state as defined by the Montevideo Convention, which you have 4 characteristics of a state. The Vatican has none of those characteristics, and yet it has access to all these UN conventions and organizations, and it shouldn't be playing that role at all. So, by educating people at every level to this, and by saying, look, when you launder money for the mafia, when you commit crimes of genocide and you're presently trafficking children all the time and causing their death, you don't have the right to operate under international law. You're what's called a transnational criminal organization. And under international law, you can seize the assets and the property of those criminal bodies to make sure they don't commit any more crimes. So lawfully, we can do that. We can seize Catholic property. In fact, Native people in Canada are doing that. They're ordering the priest out and taking back the church as reparations for the genocide, right?
And who controls the United Nations? I mean, many people are seeing that the United Nations is not doing the job that they say they are, tasked with doing. So who is really behind the power system of the United Nations?
Well, it's really evolved the way the world economy has evolved, and that is into kind of a mega corporate system, where as far back as 2011, there were 147 corporations that pretty much ran the world economy, and they fund all the UN agencies. It's like with a government, what you think is a government agency like tax collection is actually owned by offshore corporations often. And behind the mask of public service, same at the UN, there's corporate interests operating everywhere to, secure their own interests.
Yes. Now, some analysts argue that Christian Zionism has heavily influenced U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. Do you agree?
I would say, yeah, there's that strong influence, especially among like Southern Baptists and others who have a fundamentalist belief that the final war between good and evil will take place, Armageddon, in the state of Israel, and one has to support Israel to be on the right side of that fight, right? So you get that a lot from Pentecostal and Baptist.
Now, go ahead, Kevin.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was asking, what role do you think the Vatican have, and what is the Vatican's ultimate agenda for the Middle East?
Spiritually, my understanding, as my people have believed for centuries, is that what the Vatican represents on earth is Antichrist. That is, it's the mirror image of the message and the spirit of Christ. And even the name they use, Vicari Christi, in Latin, that means the one who replaces Christ. That's the official title of the Pope. He's replaced Christ. He's a man on earth pretending to be God. Jesus warned about that in Scripture all the time, right? That people will come along and do that. And that's Satan. And so not just the person, but the place of Rome, I believe, energetically, is that Antichrist force in the world. So they want ultimate power. They want to corrupt people away from that true message of Christ. And, at the same time, being a financial and military and political power in the world, looking for the one world religion. The present Pope, all the popes talk about one world religion being controlled out of Rome. And the whole notion of ecumenism, religions working together, it's all designed to do that. They're even making overtures now saying they should merge with Islam, to make this one kind of the one corporate mega corporation has its one mega religion to go along with it, right? Kind of that's, I believe, the strategy, the purpose.
And many people are not aware, my viewers here, of the Crusades that the Pope fought against some of the East, against Muslim religion. Some people have it. Some scholars believe that the Muslim religion was actually, it was influenced by Catholicism. Whether or not we agree, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that there were Crusades. Do you think that this is the Vatican's final attempt to gain control of Jerusalem?
Yes, I think there's validity to that. But the thing that the Jesuits always taught is that the way you control somebody is not through overt military force, but subversion within. You subvert the minds of children at a young age and make them your accomplices. You subvert governments within by being, the secret Jesuit oath talks about being everything to everyone to infiltrate and destroy systems from within. So I think that that's what they do now. You don't see it, but like you were alluding to, it's everywhere, right? Their influence.
Yes. Now, could competing visions of global power or order exist between Washington, Tel Aviv, and the Vatican, even when they appear aligned publicly? They appear to be aligned publicly, not signed, but aligned publicly, but they perhaps have divisions and perhaps they have distinctive agendas. Do you think the Vatican, Israel, and the United States appear to be aligned, but have major conflicts behind the scenes?
Yeah, because don't forget, in any system of power, there's factions. And we don't see those factions, but they have to present a united front all the time, their image,
Mm-hmm.
because anyone in power has to appear to be infallible, incapable of error, incapable of division, and they're all, they maintain their chain of command, if you like. But in practice, we know there's 2 or 3 permanent factions in the Vatican. There's kind of the old guard around the traditionalists, the Italian popes, and that. Who tended to be aligned with the West, and there's the New World Order popes like Francis and the guy in now who are very pro-China and are moving towards that kind of one world religion direction. So it's hard to tell from the outside, especially since it's so secretive. But I'll give you I had a personal example of the factions. When we did our first actions in Rome in 2009, I was approached by a senior Catholic cardinal who had information he wanted to share with us, which alerted us to this policy of crimen solicitanis, and where everyone is silenced about child rape. He came and gave that to us. We released it to the London Observer newspaper, and they printed it. That's how that knowledge of it broke into the world, because there was an insider who wanted, for whatever factional reason, like Ratzinger being forced out of office by the criminal court case we did. That's because the Spanish cardinals got together and wanted him out and put Bergoglio in instead, right? So the old your enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of works all the time in Vatican politics. There's all these factions fighting all the time. So similarly, I'm sure with Israel and America and everything, you can never refer to it as a unitary body. That's for public consumption, right? In fact, it's fraught with division, right?
Yes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with a very interesting topic today: the U.S., Israel, and the Vatican, the hidden struggle for global influence. Now, many of you think that it is just a war on Iran, and you think that this is just simple between 2 states, and you don't understand that geopolitics doesn't work that way. You have religious power backing these, what is happening there in the Middle East. Many of you doubt that, but you understand that, what you think and what the reality really is are 2 different things. So we are joined by we're still talking to Mr. Kevin Annett, and he's sharing with us his expert knowledge on the Vatican, Israel, and the United States as global powers. We're seeing that war being waged right before our eyes. Now, Mr. Kevin, Mr. Annett, how does religion continue? Well, I think I asked you that already. Do intelligence agencies, media, networks, and financial institutions play a role in reinforcing certain geopolitical narratives tied to these power centers?
Very much. And I'll give you an example of that. Up until the time of Pope John Paul II, in 1982, the United States had not diplomatically recognized the Vatican, but John Paul II was Polish, and he was a conduit. Vatican funds were being used by the CIA to fund the opposition movement in Poland, the Solidarity movement. And in return for that, Pope John Paul II levered the Americans into recognizing the Vatican diplomatically, which they had never done before. And as a result of that, ever since then, the CIA and the Vatican intelligence and espionage network called Santa Alianza, they've worked very closely together, arranging assassinations, monitoring, especially in the Eastern Bloc when the Soviet Union was around. They worked very closely, during and after the 80s. That's another example. I know also from my own context in intelligence communities is that Mossad is a twin to all of that as well. Mossad is one of the most effective espionage agencies in the world because of its ties to the Vatican network, which is vast, And so, I mean, it's an interrelated kind of network.
Yes. It's interesting, too, when we talk about Mossad, people might say no because the Vatican has always hated the Jews. So how do we say that that is true? And, historically, we know that the Vatican has participated in Hitler's Germany and the eradication of the Jews. What would you say?
Well, that's a front. Don't forget, it's like religion itself is for the masses, and the real power interest is operating behind that smokescreen. Similarly, for a long time, kings and the church relied on Jewish communities. One of the only occupations you could have was a moneylender, and they were a source of funds. And so they played a double thing with their whole notion of Judaism. They always referred to it, like in the Gospel of John, as, they're the ones who killed Christ, right? Not the Romans, but what the Jews had. And that fueled a lot of anti-Semitism for centuries in Europe, which is an important political tool for a lot of rulers. It wasn't just Hitler. I mean, So there's a difference between the public image or the message they put out and what's actually going on behind the scenes. And it's, can often be converging, or rather diverging.
Yes. And, one of the things that I've been looking at, Kevin, is the fact that, the Vatican, give it its credit, has already told us what they're about. The people are the ones who are just not reading. So we have even Avram Manhattan in his book, the Vatican in Global Politics. We have Malachi Martin and a lot of other Catholic authors who have mentioned that the Knight of Maltas and all of these secret societies, they are responsible for forming all of these secret societies and agencies, intelligence agencies, and yet people are not really getting it. Why do you think so?
Well, because they don't want to believe it. And, that's human beings. We see what we want to see, right? And what's not uncomfortable and all that. But it's also just the power. There was a study done during World War I. The British Bloomsbury group commissioned a study, and they found that over 85% of people in England believed what was ever in the newspapers. If you put a headline up, they will automatically believe that it's a fact, regardless of, they don't think critically. They don't say, well, who's writing it? Or what are his sources? What's the interest in putting that out? They just accept it as fact. And I don't think that's ever really changed, and that's the power of religion that claims to speak for an ultimate authority that nobody's allowed to challenge or you'll go to hell. The extreme fear and violence in the Catholic religion about that, right? And so it's fear-based mind control. They pioneered that.
Yes. Yeah. And, and Avram Manhattan stated very clearly that the Vatican controls the media, controls Hollywood, controls much of what we know as information, decides what books should be published or not published. Yeah. Is that true?
Yes. I mean, in the Middle Ages, they called it an imprimatur. That is, to publish a book, you had to have the stamp of the Vatican or the Catholic Church on it. And if you didn't have that stamp, you get burned or imprisoned for life, right? And informally, it operates the same way now. Like, for example, only about 15% of Catholics in the world live in America, right? Most Catholics in the world now are in Asia, Africa, the traditional third world areas, right? But when you look at every Hollywood movie made, whenever there's a clergy person, it's not a Baptist, it's not, who are more plentiful than Catholics in America. It's always a Catholic priest. He's the one doing the exorcism, right? Like, and it's like, it absolutely, it shows where the funding is coming from, right?
Yeah, you're right. Now, many people believe that wars are mainly about resources and economics. How much of the global conflict is also ideological or spiritual in nature?
I think George Orwell put it really well in his book 1984, when he described very prophetically what's going on now. There's 3 power blocks in the world, and they're all fighting for apparent supremacy. But in fact, they use war not to fight each other, but to control their own populations. Because when a population is in a siege mentality, like facing a pandemic or facing a war, they tend to become a herd, and they don't question authority, and they love authority, and they want to go along with it for their own safety, right? So it's used as a means to how a few control the many. It's the age-old issue with the human race, how to get a few people to get everybody to work for them and slave for them in the fields and die for them in a war, right? By convincing them that the rulers are virtuous and have their interests at heart. And without them, there'd be chaos and anarchy. So people can't govern themselves, in other words. They need these so-called rulers, right?
Yes. Now, could you tell us about the Vatican and its economics? Because people don't understand the International Monetary Fund, the WEF, and even Wall Street, that the Vatican has played a huge role in many of these powerful economic institutions. Can you really elucidate more on that? Because many people think the Vatican is just a small state, city in Italy, and they don't understand the enormous power that it wields economically, politically, and religiously.
The very fact that they've had this power for centuries has allowed it to accumulate enormous wealth. There was a Dr. Catherine Horton who did a study of the extent of Vatican control, and she found, and this has been confirmed by many other sources, that as much as 80% of all the bank deposits in the world are channeled through offshore accounts into the Vatican Bank and the Bank of International Settlements in Geneva, Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
And these are extraterritorial bank; they're outside any monitoring, right? But so that, and I mentioned before about the 147 corporations that run the world's economy. 2/3 of those are banks and financial institutions, all of which have links to the Vatican Bank. It's the chief money launderer in the world.
Yes.
If you just do the count, I mentioned the financial concordats that channel all this taxpayers' money into it. There's the collection plates every year that raise billions of dollars all over the world. And when you add it up, it's the world's largest financial octopus, right? But it's very well hidden at the same time, right, behind this whole smokescreen of religion.
Now, I've often wondered, Kevin, why is it that the Vatican allows some of its Catholic authors to unravel its agenda in the world? Does that make any sense? I mean, is that United States, sitting maybe in secret sanctum and say to a journalist, you can just write and tell them what we're about to do? Now, why do you think the Vatican allows, like, the Avra Manhattans and the Malachi Martins to write essentially what the Vatican has declared to them is their ultimate agenda?
Well, I know from my own life that people say, why are you still alive when you've been confronting these child killers for so many years and that? And I say, well, look, you don't want to create martyrs. You want to create a semblance that there's free speech, and in the background, you work to isolate and discredit that person, but you don't want to kill them openly, right? That's part of it. But also, when you think of what we're doing, the net effect of what we're doing can confirm in the audience, in the public's mind, well, look at how huge and powerful this institution is. Nobody seems to be able to change it. And there's dissidents talking about it, but what impact are they actually having? And so it can backfire on people who want to expose this by making it seem like, well, it's pointless trying to fight this thing, when in fact we found it in practice it's very vulnerable. These and in fact people are voting with their feet. I remember going into a Catholic cathedral in Dublin, Ireland, and a few years ago, and seeing only 30 people there in a church that seats 500, and that's in a quote loyal Catholic nation, right? So I mean, I think, in practice, it's facing a real crisis in terms of its public image, legitimacy. A lot of young people just stay away and, have no need for that kind of religion anymore.
Yes, but the Vatican does not care about parishioners anymore. I think they understand that they've lost that battle. I think where they're moving towards now is the control of or the leaders of the nations, and and once they control the leaders, then they can control the nation. What would you say about that?
Very much. I mean, that's the old Jesuit strategy. That's how you do it. But when the leaders themselves are out of touch with their people, and you find that more and more, and in any system of hierarchy, you find that the people at the top tend to be the most dissociated, the most out of touch. Right. And that's why their decisions historically can be suicidal. It seems like powers almost seek a way to destroy themselves because they're so out of touch with what's really going on. And yes. I see that again. So it isn't necessarily a strategy that's going to help them in the long run, when their whole system is kind of teetering.
Right. Now, could the current global instability signal a transition from a US-dominated world order to a more multipolar system?
Yes, it's definitely become multipolar. And however, Chinese hegemony is on the rise. So in another 50 years, it'll be and even before that, it'll be the dominant power in the world in every sense. And that's why the Vatican Bank money is heading in China's direction all the time. the real question, America has 14% of the global GDP now. It had 50% in the 1960s. So, I mean, and yet they're trying to maintain 750 military bases around the world. They're repeating the mistake the Soviet Union made. Military overspending destroyed the Soviet Union, and America's going down the same route. And I think Trump could very easily be in the pay of China to ensure that's going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's,
yeah. I'm wondering though, Kevin, I'm not sure how you're thinking. I am thinking that the Vatican has, and and perhaps leaders in other parts of the world have decided that they would break up the power into different countries. So maybe China will be the economic powerhouse, the superpower of the world. The United States, the military power of the world, and the Vatican as the religious power center of the world. Spiritual?
That's possible, but again, that's to assume they're unitary, and Canada or America can't maintain a big military with the status of economy. The China owns over a third of its debt, and if they ever called in that debt, all the banks would crash in America. There goes the military. So it's an unstable power to rely on for military might. In fact, China is very well able to stand on its own military prowess, and especially in alliance with the Russians. And so, I think that it's hard to say, really. It's any number of things could happen in that sense.
Yes. The Vatican has always wanted to conquer China and Russia, and very difficult, the Roman Empire, to have done that. Do you think that these two power centers, China and Russia, are also under the clutch, the stewardship, the leadership of the Vatican?
Not in. Okay, here's the thing. Like in China, it's the only country in the world that gets to appoint the Catholic cardinals. There's a special deal they made with Rome because they're so dependent on the Vatican money in that. And Russia is not Catholic; they're Orthodox, so it's kind of a different tradition.
Yeah. But they have already. The Vatican has always had a sort of, they want to control Russia. Martin, but Alfred Manhattan wrote an incident chapter in his book on that, in terms of the Orthodox, Christians in Russia, and the fact that the Vatican has always wanted to proselytize them, and hence had the killing of so many people there in Russia during World War II. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, that's true, and another example of that we discovered when I was lecturing in Serbia. A number of years ago, we discovered that the third largest death camp during World War II, after Auschwitz and Treblinka, was Jasenovac in Croatia, and it was run out of the Vatican, run by a Franciscan bishop called Ivan Saric, and their target was Orthodox Serbs. They existed to kill they killed about 1 million Serbs, to wipe out the Orthodox, and then send Catholic missionaries into the area like they did to indigenous people all over the world. And so, absolutely, they have a genocidal agenda towards non-Catholic people.
Yes, and the Orthodox. Now, we see there's something in the world that is happening, Kevin. I'm not sure, but when we look at the fact that we have a war on Iran right now, the United States is engaged in that war, and probably the West, and probably we could say Western Europe as well. However, we are hearing about an approaching virus, if you will, hantavirus and other viruses, Ebola, whatever. And
Ebola,
yet still we don't see these other powers like Russia or China speaking out against anything the United States is really doing. They're only talking about the war should end, and they talk their talk. You really wonder if these powers are not working together behind the scenes while pretending to be public enemies. What do you make of that?
Yeah, because politics follows the nature of the economic system, and in the world economy now, the wealth is, they called it a fusion economy, where in the fusion in physics, particles combine so closely that suddenly they explode with a huge force, right? A fusion bomb, and that's what's happened economically. The wealth is so concentrated that in the 1990s, the whole world economy changed. And now you have really what's called a corporatocracy, where it isn't about governments anymore. It's about these mega corporate blocks operating. And And when you follow that, that gives you more of an insight into what's happening politically, because the politics have to be maintained as the camouflage all the time. But behind it, I mean, I remember there's this classic picture of that Catholic cardinal I talked about, Timothy Dolan, sitting with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and they're all laughing, and it's kind of like political designations don't make any difference. They're all serving the same beast, right? And it's all about the money. And I was told that when I first went to Rome, there was an Italian senator who took me aside and he said, "You have to understand that the mafia, the Vatican Bank, the church, they're all the same people, one clique, and they're only concerned about their money. That's it, nothing else."
Yeah, right? Correct. Prince Charles, well, he's now King Charles III. What am I saying? No longer Prince Charles, right? He went into the U.S. Congress some weeks ago. And I'm not sure if you listened to his speech, but what was your takeaway from when he even mentioned that the U.S., Washington, D.C. particularly, is the city of the two Georges? What do you think he meant by that?
You see, the European Union is kind of caught in this power struggle. And remember when Trump said he wanted to invade Greenland?
Yes.
And annex it? Okay, so if Trump's trying to play like the Vatican does, all the sides, right? He's thinking like a CEO, and he wants to have all his bases covered. So if Putin, who I think is smarter than Trump, if he proposed to Trump that they take out Europe, that'd be the way to do it. You outflank it from two directions. And the whole campaign against Keir Starmer now in England to try to destabilize English politics. I mean, it could just be destabilization strategy.
Yes.
To absorb the European Union.
Yes. But do you think the U.S. is actually moving back to monarchical rule? Everything the King Charles said in Congress was, every statement was an applause, right? And it was so ridiculous to know that big people, the United States, which which brandishes itself as the greatest country in the world, could be so subservient, as it were, to the king of England by clapping at every statement he made. They were making applause. What did you take from that?
Don't forget, the American system was set up on a British monarchical structure. The president is like the king, the Senate is like the House of Lords, and the least powerful body, Congress, is like the House of Commons. John Adams and the Federalists designed it that way deliberately. They brought in the electoral college system, where you can negate the popular vote if you don't like how the people voted. The appointed Supreme Court judiciary, it's all based on the British monarchy. So they talk about a republic. In practice, it's operated very much like a monarchy. The president has more power than a king. In war-making power, passing executive orders. Executive order, what does that have to do? One guy writing a law and everyone agrees to, has to go along with it. That's monarchy. So I'm not surprised that Charles would make these remarks. Don't forget, he's been criminally convicted of a whole number of things, involvement in the disappearance of children, and that he's always, they have to use these platforms to grandstand and make it look like, grab the headlines to distract from these other things, right? So, it's partly that too.
Correct. Because the people in the United States, those on the left, the political left, they were like, oh, Charles is giving it to Donald Trump because he's telling him that he has to follow checks and balances and all the nonsense that they were telling. But you're saying that the original system, the system from the beginning, the U.S. system from the beginning stages, is in the form of a monarchical government. So what is this thing about no King's Day and it's Trump? It's Trump. Trump wants to be a king.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opposition to him, including from former Trump supporters, for him to do that. People have realized now he wants absolute power. But that's just the system of the corporatocracy. More and more, it's about oligarchs ruling the world. 3 or 4 oligarchs want to run everything. That's the direction. But an example of that, how America's always been a monarchy too. They're always talking about the abolition of slavery by Lincoln. But if you read the 13th Amendment, it doesn't abolish slavery. It abolished slavery except in prisons. And, if you've been convicted of a crime, you're still considered a slave. That's why they have this huge prison population. Private prisons are on the rise everywhere, private prison system. And so it's got all the trappings of what empire is all about, right?
Yes. So do you think that slavery might resurface?
It has. It exists all over the place. We've cataloged it in the ICE prison. There's slave farms. Um, that's a lot of the work I've been doing with people in the Western U.S., where a lot of these ICE detention centers are. It isn't just about immigrants; it's American citizens are scooped up. I had worked with a group in Texas. They were arrested simply they were doing common law education, and the ICE people burst into their homes, arrested all of them, sentenced one man to 10 years in prison because he failed to appear in court from a summons. Normally, that's a misdemeanor. Now you're getting 10 years in prison for failure to appear in court. That's the direction of a police state, right? So, I mean, we hear this all the time, and part of that is the human slave trade is huge. It's on the growth all over the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those of us who understand the Bible and Revelation, it says that though the mark of the beast will be, imposed upon all classes of people, the rich and the poor and the free men and the bondmen. So we know that slavery is going to be sort of practiced before the mark of the beast, right? Because the Bible itemizes that all classes from the top to the bottom will be given that sort of mark. What do you think about that? Do you think people are talking about that? Do you think that the Bible was fear-mongering, or do you see that the biblical predictions are coming to pass?
I think they're very much coming true. And I also remember in, I think so in one of the Psalms, it said, remember those in bondage as one who is bonded with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, clearly we have to realize that this is not some issue we can ignore. This is aimed at all of us. And that's something I learned. And the example I always give in Canada about that is that when people were concerned about the mandatory vaccinations, I said to them, if you're a native in Canada, you can't refuse medical treatment. That goes back to 1874. Ever since then, if you refuse to take shots, they put you in jail if you're native. I said, it's happened to them. Now it's happening to all of us, right? And it's the same thing playing out, right?
Yes. Talk about the CBDCs and the control of the financial system. Today, I actually did a pre-recorded video on financial lockdowns. Now we're hearing about hikes in the prices of gasoline and fuel in general. What role do you think the war on Iran is really strategically planned to effectuate that sort of system?
I think it's, when you look at the system's tendency to deliberately create recessions, to crash the economy so the larger units can gobble up the smaller inefficient ones. That's been a feature for many years in the economic system. But when oil and gas prices spike, that tends to trigger recessions. And I think in a way it was just a way to do that. These are deliberate steps to cause destruction in order to bring in perhaps something like the Bitcoin currency, something that's more centrally controllable. And it again goes with the whole pattern tendency to concentrate wealth and financial control, right?
Yes, and financial control. Yes, and when we look at the whole matter of the viruses that we're suddenly seeing now, lots of viruses being spoken about, do you think that that is also going to play a role in the coming New World Order? Viruses and the viruses and different diseases are going to play a role in the launching of the New World Order, the new global order.
They find that, and a lot of our research about how Native children and others were used in drug testing experiments by a lot of the companies that are bringing out, like Pfizer and all these other companies. The part of the development of these drugs was not only for mind control purposes, right, experimental, but they find that they call it herd reaction studies, right? And they find that 95% of people will give up their rights if there's a pandemic threatened, that basic threat to their health. They will most readily surrender that if there's a pandemic, not to a war necessarily, but pandemic strikes right at the heart of their fear. And it's used as a tool all the time to bring about whatever dictatorial measure you want, right? So, I mean, it's like religion, it's a very good tool to control the masses, right?
What I do fear is that before 2020, before the coronavirus, we've never had lockdowns, national lockdowns or worldwide lockdowns before. Now that they have those laws on the book, if people should protest against whatever they're protesting against, could be high fuel costs, the cost of living, that it could prompt them to lock us down again.
Oh, they don't need any excuse to lock us down. I mean, I get that all the time working with people all over the world. The rule of law is gone. That any notion of democracy, accountability, the rule of law, that went out the window a long time ago. People know that on the ground. But I mean, I don't know. It's like when you're in power, you play a game and perpetrate a lie so much, you come to believe the lie after a while. And you don't see that it's fabricated from the beginning, just like the nature of their power. It's an illusion, ultimately. Right?
Pedro Giamatti is saying, how can he say it's Trump, yet saying America's system is like a monarchy? Certainly it sounds like TDS. How would you respond?
I don't know what TDS is, but
yeah, I don't me either. But you understand his question?
Well, look at his behavior. The proof is in how someone acts, not what they say, right? And everything he's doing is moving towards one-man rule. I mean, no president in history has written the kind of hundreds of executive orders, right? Basic rule of a republic is you're not subject to any law in which you haven't had a say. You can't go along with the word of one man, whether it's a pope or a president who writes out a law and says, now everybody has to obey it. That's monarchy. Monarchy, one rule. Right?
Yeah. I've always said on this program also, Kevin, that people who doubt the role and the power of the Vatican, when the Pope goes to the United States, it doesn't just go to the White House by itself. Like, the president travels to the Vatican and he travels there and he goes and he pays his homage to the Pope. But the Pope, the president of the United States has to go to, Virginia, wherever their base is, and bring him and pay him that sort of homage. And at the death of any pope, the U.S. presidents go there and the sort of ceremonies. And, at one point, I think it was at the death of the funeral service of Pope Paul II, that you had about 3 surviving U.S. presidents who were kneeling at the coffin of the Pope, the dead Pope. Shouldn't that tell us that who really controls whom?
Right. And that's the thing to understand. The Roman Empire never ended. It just changed its form. And
yes.
we're dealing that. That's the funny thing, things don't change over the centuries except the technology and the language, but the same power relationships remain. And they need the idea that there's one person in charge and one person with a direct line to heaven in order to control everybody. Because when you look at the teachings of Christ, he said the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's inside each of us. We're our own rulers. We're spiritually self-governing. So we should be politically as well. And that is a threat to any ruler because they want them to believe, no, you don't have self-governance. You have the rights we give you and we can take them away at any point. That whole Roman notion of law, rather than common law, that it's inherent within all of us. And actually, I wrote a book exactly on that, another one, combining political, personal, spiritual sovereignty. And we go into all that, the connection, how all are important to live,
yes.
right?
Yes. And Kevin, could you just, let our audience understand the value of reading? Because I think that we're living in a world now where people go to school and they read some textbooks and they graduate with some degrees and then they think that they're educated. Can you tell them that, the education of the world is really brainwashing? Sorry, sad to say that, but do you believe that anyway? That's what I believe.
Well, we're becoming we're becoming an illiterate culture. And I know that just talking to people, the new generation, they have no need of reading anymore because of the technology. And that, of course, is part of the whole agenda, which we haven't talked about. And it's really the whole integration, what they call brain-computer interface, trying to create cybernetic organisms that are integrated with one machine mind. And, that's where we're heading. That's the ultimate omnicide, destruction of the human race. And So we have to fight that all the time. And one of the ways we do that is, encouraging just sitting down and reading and talking off the internet,
Yes.
reestablishing those normal human connections, right?
Now, Trump derangement syndrome nonsense. How do you respond to that?
I don't know. I
Kevin?
don't know what that means. I mean,
Yeah. The
yeah,
fact of the matter is that
it's
we're all crazy, right? We can say that all these presidents are
that's
crazy
the point.
people.
I remember my native relatives in Winnipeg always said, Kevin, the Mooniash, and that's a term for white people. It said that means thieves. It said the Mooniash are all crazy. It says
They're
the
all
Mooniash
crazy.
are all crazy. Don't take them seriously, right? But
Absolutely, and that's the whole point. I think that because Trump is so what you call it now, he's everything he does is in the open air, right? He hides nothing. He has no filter, as they would say. But I mean, all these presidents are also crazy. George W.
right
Bush,
now,
Obama's. Go ahead, Kevin.
yeah, I mean, he's just the worst example of what is endemic to every American president, just taken to another extreme.
Correct.
And yeah, all presidents use executive power, but not to the extent he's wielding it as his private weapon. He passed hundreds of executive orders. Previous presidents maybe passed a dozen or two, and they brought in the Civil Rights Act and that through executive orders. But they're occasionally used because Congress and the Senate would say, hold on, you can't rule like a dictator. Whereas now they're all sitting back and saying, yes, rule as a dictator.
Very well said. Very well said, Kevin, because that is what we've never seen before. Even though
Right.
they've done it before, they've bypassed Congress, but they've never been bold enough to say we can. Trump has been bold enough to say during his second administration that he can
Yeah.
bypass Congress. Congress does not have to give him any rights to go to war. That's what he said
Right.
that multiple times. So this is the reality that we basically live in. Now, Kevin, how would you explain to our audience that this has been going on for a long time, but it has reached a crescendo of where the presidents are just now, brazenly actually violating the principles of the Constitution?
Yeah. Well, you know what? It really reminds me of the last days of the Roman Republic
Yes.
because, yeah, they still had the Senate, they still had the formal structures, but everybody was looking. They saw Caesar waiting in the wings, and they were wanting it because the empire needed this kind of one authority, and it's like that right now in practice. And I know that from my contacts. I'm half American, so I know a lot of people down there, and
Mm-hmm.
people in DC as well say all the time, everyone knows the Constitution is dead. Everyone knows there's no more republic, but they don't want to admit it to the average person in the street because then they might get up in arms and they say, okay, let's have another revolution like 1776.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, some people are doing that. There was people in 22 states who have declared independence from the Trump regime. They're not going to obey executive orders. They're not going to pay federal taxes. They're going to have their own conventions and rebuild America from the grassroots. So you're seeing all this opposition building all over, including in a lot of Republican states. This is happening. So there's a lot of change in the works happening.
Mm. So you do have a positive picture of how this will end. Do you think people will rise up eventually and take back the system into their own hands?
I see it happening all the time because I do a lot of work on the ground. I travel around a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been blacklisted for many years, so I rely on people a lot, on the ground. And I see it everywhere. But people
Mm-hmm.
don't believe in themselves. They've
Mm-hmm.
lost faith, they've lost hope. And you have to restore it. You got to kind of lead by example all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's what people are waiting now. It's at a turning point. It can go in many directions.
Mm-hmm. Jeff is saying I was explaining what the previous user meant with the term TDS. But yes, Trump is evil and controlled just like the rest, of course. And we agree with you there. Pedro is saying he said, well, this thing came up. He said men should not be in women's sports. You agree the world didn't Olympics in France. How would you respond to that?
I'm not sure. I mean,
I guess he's
it's like,
suggesting. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
well, politicians know how to say what people need to hear. So the last person you ever have to take seriously is a politician, because what they say will change depending on who they're speaking to, right? So,
Correct.
anyway,
And And they also use these topics to polarize the people, in terms of they're on one side of the political spectrum, and then when people are polarized, they're easily controlled. Is that so?
Yes, and of course, it's like lawyers in a courtroom pretend to be fighting each other, but then after and defending their clients, but in fact, after they sit in the club and have drinks together. I mean, that's the way the political system works. There's no sides. They just manipulate people into those.
Correct. I love that. I love that analogy with the defense lawyers. Yeah, because they do their job, right, and they get paid, and afterwards they're friends, and they perhaps are buddies too. Trump is not an open. Oh, go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
Well, that's why Thomas Jefferson was opposed to the political party system. He said it's going to rip apart the country. He wanted, and he didn't believe in a electoral college or any of that. He wanted a more grassroots democracy, right? And that was rejected by the elites, But anyway, that's self-evident, I think.
Yes. Well, to be frank with you, many of our people don't know that. They don't understand. I think sometimes we're probably talking Russian to many of our audience here because they are not understanding the profundity of the history, because the history has been romanticized, if you will, and people like to think there's good and bad, and morally upstanding, and another person is immoral. They don't understand that the history is textured and nuanced. And that is what we're trying to do here. But, it's not yet gaining a lot of traction because the algorithm also controls the narrative. But I guess eventually when people begin to wake up, they will see that what they have been told versus the reality are completely different. What would you say about that, Kevin?
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, it always boils down to the human factor. And I remember in workshops where we do training in common law, and setting up common law courts and that, I always ask people two questions. I say, how many people in the room want to see the world change? And everyone puts their hand up. And then I say, how many people here are willing to change? And nobody puts their hand up.
Yeah.
Because if you're not willing to take that risk yourself and put that on the line, nothing will change, right? You're always looking to somebody else to lead you, right?
The pandemic actually brought that out into reality. You didn't have to do any research. Well, probably you could look at what happened in the pandemic, to corroborate your research. Because when I spoke to many people, some of them understood what was happening, but they still went with the narrative. Why? Because their friends were doing it, and their family members told them to do it, and they were just forced to do it. Their pastors or whomever, so you see that people are not leaders, they are followers. The majority of people in the world are not leaders, and they might be having a position as a leader in a corporation, but they're not leaders, they're followers. How would you, do you agree with my statement?
Well, just because they've been raised in a state of dependency, and when you get a system too big, you get hierarchy coming in. I remember I grew up on the Winnipeg, in the Canadian prairies, and near us was a Hutterite settlement, and it was a cooperative community, and everyone was equal. They shared everything, and whenever they had more than 100 people in their colony, they split off and formed a new one, because when you get more than 100 people, you get hierarchy developing, and people forget how to take responsibility for everything, and that's the mark of a real freedom, is when everyone is taking responsibility, like the ancient Athenian model of democracy, where everyone took responsibility to rule. It wasn't a class of politicians who ruled over you. And I like that quote from Thomas Paine in the American Revolution, where he said, democracy is not about choosing masters, but having none.
Yes. And he was brilliant, wasn't he? Thomas Paine.
He was good. He was an immigrant.
Yes.
He was an immigrant, a legal immigrant in America from England. And
How do you explain that those guys living in yesteryear, the Thomas Jeffersons and the Thomas Paines and all these, world leaders and famous leaders, they did not have the internet and this wide body of knowledge that we have access to nowadays, yet still they were brighter, they were smarter, they had original thought. They were not the reflectors of just other men's thoughts. They use other men's thought to form their own. How would you explain what's happening now?
Part of it was the culture they were in. Do you know people were more literate before public schools than they were after? In America, there was a very high literacy rate. So when Thomas
Mhm.
Paine wrote Common
Mhm.
Sense,
Mhm.
that was kind of a call to Americans to rally around the revolution. It
Mhm.
was read by 1 in 3 Americans or 1 in 2 Americans. Like everyone was reading it or having it read to them, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And pamphleteering back then was very popular. Everyone, was very literate, unlike now, where everything is hearsay and secondhand through the internet. Like
Mhm.
when you learn from your own lived experience, it's permanent, right? And it becomes real to you. Like I had my life destroyed by this church when I tried to bring out the truth. So that's very real to me. It's not some abstract issue kind of ignore because it's in my face every day. When people have to fight every day to survive, that's something. It's tangible. It isn't just an idea you've gotten from somebody else and then you can ignore it, right?
Hmm. And I just want to just add here that the people, those people were more religious, and their main text was the Bible. And that is the irony of what we have today, where people are reading sciences and they're reading all this philosophy and great books and great minds. We have so many different publications, journals, and all that, and yet still people do not have knowledge. The profundity of knowledge is lacking. How would you respond to that? That we are now saying religion is what makes you simple. The Bible is too simplistic, yet still the people of yesteryear, was their main text, and they revolutionized, as it were, the Western world.
Yeah, well, that's one of the points I'm making here that the real basis of the American Republic was the spiritual communities of the
Mm-hmm.
Puritans in New England. When they landed, they said, "We're a biblical people. We want to
Mm-hmm.
create Christ's nation on earth to
Mm-hmm.
receive Him when He returns. We have to live according to that ethical
Mm-hmm.
standard that's in Scripture." So it was very much a biblical nation, right? People thought everything in biblical terms, like the English Revolution when they chopped off Charles's head,
Yes.
Cromwell and the others. They did it as they call themselves Bible Republicans, because you're not to have earthly rulers. That's to supplant God. You have one authority, God, and then everyone is equal within that. Like John Adams said, he said, American is a nation of sovereigns. We're equal with each other with one authority, God.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
can't have popes and presidents and rulers over you because it's blasphemous. It goes against the natural order, right? So,
But well, that was the Jews were, the Jews, they had a system they had a theocratic system, but one of the punishments that was actually imposed upon them was that under theocracy God ruled them, but they decided that they wanted to be ruled like other nations. Remember that
right.
other nations had other rulers who were abusing them, and God said to them that that's why you should be ruled under me. But they didn't want that. People like
No.
slavery. And that's the whole irony. People like to be treated badly, abused, oppressed. And that is something that the psychologists will have to study, because they were under a system in which they had lots of freedom under God and they were prosperous, yet still they yearned for something that was worse. Why? Why is that in the
Well,
human psyche?
it's that shadow we all carry, that dual nature in us of
Mm-hmm.
light and darkness, and um, that warning in the book of Samuel, where Samuel the prophet,
Mm-hmm.
they says, if you have a king over you, he'll make you work in the fields, he'll steal
Yeah.
your daughters, you'll live in
Mm-hmm.
slavery. And they said,
Mm-hmm.
we don't care. We want to be powerful like other nations. So there's always
Yeah.
that urge to power, I think, when it's
Mm-hmm.
known as. Um, but it's a constant war in all of us, right? And that's something we all have to face, I think.
And that is what I'm seeing in the United States. They are looking at other nations. In recent times on my channel, I'm not sure if you're seeing it on other people's channel or if you yourself have a channel, but I see this sort of China is this wonderful state now to many Westerners, and Russia, and the West is bad. And I'm not suggesting here that the West is not bad, because we see what is happening and what the United States is doing, and Western Europe in the Middle East, and particularly in Iran. But how do you explain that psyche now, where we're moving from one moral state or one moral region to another immoral one? So there, this dichotomy: the West is bad, the West is evil, and the East is great.
Well, it's that swing back and forth all the time. but it's often when people romanticize, you can only romanticize a group or another nation when you don't know about them,
Yes.
because it's like the way people do here with indigenous people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there are some kind of pristine. No, there are very few true indigenous people left, and there's
Mm-hmm.
just as much corruption and murder in the native world as there is in the white world, right? Because they've
Right.
all been corrupted by this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it'll be the
Mm-hmm.
same if you went to live in Russia or China, right? So, I
Yes.
say to people who are advocates, well, go experience it for a while and see, and then we'll talk about it, right?
It's amazing. Now, Trump is not an open book. WW10 is saying we are still waiting to see his tax. Is it redo? Yeah, or tax returns. His tax returns. How would you say it?
Ultimately, I don't think it matters because all rulers act pretty much the same way. It's not even about their personality. He's not, he really doesn't matter in the long run. Really matters, and that's the message in our self-governance book. What matters is what we're going to do next, right? Not what they are. He's 80, he's going to kick off any day, probably, right? Who cares?
Yes, yes. And my response, Kevin, would be that he's not an open book in terms of his personal life. Certainly, he's not. He's not going to tell you his business, deals with China, with Russia, or whomever. But he's an open book in terms of the empire's policies, U.S. empire's policies. He is certainly an open book as far as that is concerned, right? Because he's not embarrassed with what he's doing. But in terms of his private life, in terms of his shenanigans, his criminal deeds, he's not going to reveal that to us.
Well,
Would you
and
agree?
we have another serious thing is that in one of the court cases we're involved in recently, we had evidence from his own bodyguard, Keith Schiller, that he was involved in these child snuff filming parties in the Epstein apartment in 1999, and confirmed from people on the inside that he does. All the people do these things, right? And so to put him up on some kind of pedestal is ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what he
What do you
means
think?
by I
Like
don't like
going home,
women.
your guest doesn't like women. What is
I,
that sort of?
I don't think I didn't make any
Yeah.
reference to women, so I'm not sure what he means.
Yeah, I don't know where he got that impression from. Yeah. Now, what is the host and the guest belief as to the identity of the whore and the beast? I guess the whore of Babylon and the beast. What and that these two, terminologies are used in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, they're referring to the ultimate fight between Antichrist and Christ and good and evil. It's that, that kind of bipolar theology, which unfortunately accounts for a lot of the problems of the world. Because if you believe you're all good and somebody else is all evil, you commit genocide. You can commit any atrocity. So, the reality is that good and evil is within all of us, and you got to take responsibility. For that instead of projecting it on others all the time, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And my understanding that the whore and the Protestants of yesteryear agree that the whore of Babylon was the Roman Catholic papacy itself.
Oh, very
All
much.
of them preach
Yeah.
that, and that the beast. Well, they did not know the second beast, but Seventh-day Adventists preach, and I believe that 100% that the second beast of Revelation is that power in the United States, and we can see now that both are coming together. We have that first beast, the whore of Revelation, which is the Roman Catholic papacy, and the beast that was the country coming out of the earth beast, which is the United States. And they are forming, as we can see, the countries, both of them were against each other, and now we can see that they are aligned. How would you respond?
Possible. I don't know. Ultimately, we can't know. Who
Yes.
knows the day and the hour of the judgment?
Yes.
We're not supposed to know.
Yes. Yes, but we're talking about a system, as we're saying here. Politically, people tend to look at systems from a personality perspective. So we talk about Trump, Obama, but when I look at politics, I look at systems. The same thing with religion. I think the Bible speaks about more so systems than personalities. What would you say about that?
Well, that's how we've always approached our work too, with the common law courts and all the work. Is that you don't look at the finger puppets being held by the system, because rulers ultimately aren't in control of anything. They're the figureheads. You look at the money and the systems of the relationships of power. That's the only way you can understand. Like first principles, like Aristotle would say. Understand the nature of something to know what it's going to do. People don't understand the nature of what they're under, and so they're constantly in a state of confusion. And I think they're trying to humanize something so big as this world system. People have to personalize it to make it real. So it's embodied in a certain individual, right? And but that is very misleading.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that is what. And then the media also paint that picture in our minds that this is the person that is most influential, sorry, in whatever field that they're talking about. Now, we're wrapping up. Do you think that the Vatican um, do you think that this might be the final pope? I don't know. He's an American pope,
Sure
a
hope so.
U.S. pope. I mean, one would have thought that, I'm sure if Thomas Jefferson's and the likes of these people were to be resurrected, what would they think that you have a U.S. citizen who is the current pope of Rome? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's not the direction because everyone thought there was going to be the first African pope. It would make more sense because that's where more of the power is shifting to Asia and Africa and the Vatican and South America. And like I said, this guy is more South American than he is American in terms of his background and all of his connections. But I think, you can I'm sure the structure will continue because it's so important as a financial powerhouse and a ideological control mechanism, right? But I don't think that really matters. It's like a dead shell. It was always my experience of all these churches is that it was just, whitewashed corpse, whitewashed
Yes,
tomb of Jesus, right?
yes. But this pope, as you're saying, Kevin, meets all qualifications. He can be described as American because he was born in the U.S., but his family, I think they said, came from Haiti and another country. Is he of that sort of heritage too? I think
I don't know enough about him.
yeah, he
Robert
has
Prevost.
some family tree from all the way from Haiti.
Hmm.
I understand. So he would be black. He probably has, black blood, black DNA, American in terms of U.S. citizen, and he has lived, as you're saying, largely in Latin America. So he fits all of the boxes in one pope. What would you say?
Well, again, like the popes aren't the power, and
Right.
like that's the College of Cardinals, the Curia, what they call it. That's where the formal power is, and so I don't know. It's how you view it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just saying when you look at him, he does fit all of them. Well, what would you be your final statement to those of us who are listening, and what should we take away from this this dialogue, this conversation? Is the Vatican the real power broker, the real power behind the scene, or the U.S. or Israel?
There isn't one source to the power, and frankly, I don't even think in a society as integrated now as the one we have globally, you almost can't trace it to one source. It's just this kind of mega machine, and it's come from certain places, right? But it's evolving into something nobody can understand because it's too big to
Hmm.
understand. And
Hmm.
that's what I think we're kind of in a runaway machine, and I don't know where it's going to lead, frankly. But you know, it's kind of like in quantum physics when you're looking at subatomic particles, and the more you look at them, the more they disappear
Hmm.
because they don't actually exist. Like reality, they say, is an illusion. And I think spiritually, that's true. That we're dealing with an illusory world, and we have to
Hmm.
understand what's behind it. Kind of pull back the shroud, and
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's part of the spiritual discipline to do that.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining, and we hope that one of these days you might come back and share with us some of
Yeah, I'd like
your
to.
insights into the
Thank
geopolitical
you.
world. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Okay.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank Mr. Annett for being with us today and sharing with us some very interesting perspectives. Now, many of us are running around, and I know that you want to hear what is happening in the world, but this is the root. We are looking at the root causes of what is happening, the power system, the brokers behind the system, because if we don't understand these things, then we will not understand what the little things that they're giving you unredacted on the Tucker Carlson show. You're not going to understand how the world works, right? Because certainly it's not just the Israel that controls, that runs the world. We have other forces behind Israel, and that's what we're trying here to unpack. Now, whether or not you will believe it and you're taken by surprise, that is another matter. And you will have to determine that for yourselves and for your family. But what is ahead of us is not something that is going to be before our eyes. We're going to see that there are going to be things happening as bizarre, that we perhaps cannot explain. And that is why we have to look at the root. The more we look at the root, it's the more that we are going to be able to unpack. We won't know everything because we're not gods here and we're not pretending to know it all, right? But the more you know the root, center, what lies at the core, then that is a time that you are going to be able to unpack everything or most of what you're seeing happening before your eyes. But I can tell you, half of what you're 75, 80% of what you're consuming on social media, you're consuming on YouTube, not going to give you the answers to what is happening, the major conflicts in the world. And that is what we are here to unpack. The majority of people don't like this content because they think that it is not what they hear. It's almost like some food you eat, the physical food. The food that is best for our bodies is not that is what we want to reject. The body doesn't want nutritious food. That's why we're sick, right? We tend to love juicy stories, right? Reactionary stories. We don't want to listen to stories that will help us to become more intellectually grounded. And that is what is happening. And I understand that. But guess what? At the end of the day, I can sleep sound that I did tell you, right? That these things are going to happen. Because, I probably could do the same thing too and just tell you all the foolishness, right? And say and repeat ad nauseum what the other YouTubers and the other people are saying on social media. Could do that, okay? But that is not going to give me a fair conscience when things begin to fall apart. And we can see that things are already falling apart. The center cannot hold. So what was your thinking? How do you think, what do you think is happening in life? What did you learn from the presentation here with Kevin Annett? Let me hear some of your comments, or not, we can end our live and go our separate ways. What did you learn from? What was a core thing, something that you learned from the conversation with Kevin Annett? Can you hear me well? Are you guys hearing me well? I see that I'm sort of, my thing is delayed, but are you hearing me properly? Are you hearing me clearly on the live? Can you hear me? Make sure you also head over to the video. I did create a pre-recorded video on possible financial lockdowns. So make sure that you go and you prod the algorithm to send the videos along the platform, because that's a very important video, as well as this very important conversation that we are currently having on this platform at the moment. So make sure that you go and you watch that financial lockdowns approaching. And I think that that is nearer than we imagine. So thank you so much that you're hearing. Okay, so make sure you go over, watch it, send it to people, send this live also over to people, because we need this information to be spread. Now, let me just say something here too. Many of the books I read, many of the articles that I read, and and people that I listen to, you might not agree with them in everything. One. Secondly, you might not even like them. All right, because they might be involved in things that you are not necessarily, you don't endorse or whatever. What you should do, however, as intellectuals, is to look at what matters, right? You go to the grocery store, you might not like the, the cashier or even the owner of the store, right? But the fact is that you have to eat, right? So this is eating also. When we talk about intellectual stuff, is brain food that will help you to think. So it's not necessarily the person who is bearing the message, but the message itself is what you should be able to look at and to examine for yourselves. A lot of times as people I hear, I don't like that person, so I don't want to listen to him or to her, right? But that is not how intellectuals behave. Right? If we were to do that, many of us wouldn't understand exactly what is happening in the world. All right. And how many people like us? People can say that they don't like me too, right? So the fact of the matter is that we need to move beyond likability into what the person is saying, the substance behind what that individual is saying or portraying. All right. Any questions, any comments? So we can continue with this very important dialogue. Make sure you like the video and you share it with as many people as you can to prod the algorithm. Any questions, comment about anything, whether the speech, the conversation with Annett, or another matter that is at hand. Did you watch the video? And what were some of your reactions to the financial lockdowns? The high gas prices that we're seeing now that are prompting protests around the world, including there in Africa. What is your take on that situation or those developing stories? Any question, any comment? All right, so if you don't have any questions, any comment, we can always end the live. Thank you so much for joining, and I might not have a live for now because you guys don't support the live, so I am perhaps not going to be having a live for now. So I'll just make pre-recorded videos. Yes, I cannot. You have to either like the live or you are part of the live, because this is something that costs a lot of money, and many of you are not contributing to any of the financial to get the lives up and so forth. So why waste my time? How will we survive in the Caribbean? Somebody's asking, how will we survive in the Caribbean? That's a very good question. Now, we can only survive, one, if we begin to understand how economies work and function. Many of us don't understand. I think we just believe that we have a job and we put money into the bank and we save our monies, and we hope that, if we should lose our job, then we'll be able to survive through the rainy days. I mean, that is standard, and I'm not going to beat you for beating that, because that's how we have been socialized. However, we must understand that it's much bigger than that, because if they should change the economic infrastructure, we can even lose our monies. Right? So what if you lose your money, all your savings, or your savings are, diminished because of the exchange rate or the online, the digital dollar, or whatever, not dollar, but digital currency that they're about to implement? How are you going to survive? Because you can wake up one morning and everything is gone. Everything is gone. So how are you going to survive? Well, it's going to be a lot of psychological strength, which many of us don't have, because we have become a part of the matrix. We have become too accustomed to easy life, and we think that is going to last forever, and we don't have the skills. We need to come together as citizens now and begin to make farms, wherever we can, and maybe we need to move away from the cities and begin to plan together. And those who have tomatoes, you can barter with those. We need to go back to simple life. Right? Living in the cities and thinking that you're going to go to the supermarket and have food all the time, all right, and everything is going to be all right. You'll have money in the bank and you can just go and take some money and you move on. It's not. All of that is coming. All of that is coming to an end. All right? And so we have to reorient our minds again to saying that life is simple and we don't have to make it as complex, and as we like too much convenience too, right? And that's the problem. We like easy life, and that is not what is going to take us through this period. If you like the going, just putting things in microwave and everything is done, right? And you call your friend and you gossip and you chat, all of that is coming to an end. You might not even be able to talk about what is on your mind to your friends anymore, because you're being watched, you're being surveilled. Right? So our entire lives are actually unraveling. How do we prepare for it? Educate ourselves, and we have to become psychologically strong, get rid of excess, and know that if you have to run and move to another location, you are not going to have that psychological burden that you've left so many things behind you, because we might have to get up and go. Right? And that is how we are going to survive. But what is your take, Javid? Is it JEVD? What is your take? How do you think you will survive? How do you think, as a collective, we can survive? Any other questions, comment? That's a good question, though. How will we survive? Because it's all about survivability, but we also have to be exposed to the truth and to what is happening. And what is happening in the Caribbean right now, many of us are not exposed to the truth because we're so much gossipy. We're just a gossipy region, and that is what really attracts us and make us click. But intellectual conversations like this is not what is going to gain much traction in this region, unfortunately so. Any other question, comment? Oh, somebody's here. The Caribbean will need to prepare contingencies for food, gas storage, family communities, farming, and sharing. Now, let me say something too. Yes, that's great. And these are great recommendations and suggestions from JEBD. But let me just say this very clearly. When hard times come upon us, they are going to divide us. The elites are going to divide us, just like what happened in the pandemic. So you'll find that even some of your best friends, you are going to lose them, right? Because they might say that you should do something, you don't want to do it. And then your friend decides to report you because that is the only way he or she's going to survive, right? So when we say collectively, we are, who is the we? Because sometimes the people that you think are your friends, and you think all of us are Caribbean citizens and we're nice and we're going to help each other, it's not going to work like that. It is not going to work like that because the elites, their major quest is to divide us so that they can control us. So they are going to divide us even on information. And we saw that during COVID. So we don't have to even reiterate that. We saw where even our own families, there are families who turned against their own family members because of the whole COVID and the narratives that were being dispersed. So when we say we, who are the we? Because the we might just be one person, or the we might just be yourself. I'm sorry, but you might just have to stand on your own two legs. And I'm saying this because it is true, right? Don't think it's the we and we're all going to come together and fight against an oppressive system. It's not going to work that way. Many people won't be on your side and they would betray you, even some of your family members and your friends. Okay, so let's not be too comfortable now. Yeah, Stephen Knight is saying good afternoon. Good afternoon, Stephen Knight. Yeah, we were on the live. Did you guys get the notification? I set up a live last night. I'm not sure if you got the notification of the algorithm, which seems to be very, very reluctant of sending out notifications for lives. I'm not sure if you actually received it. But yes, that's a good question, Javed. But remember now that you might not see people, and that's why now we have to unite as much as you can, even though some of them will still betray you. Unite around people who are serious, who understand what's going on. You can talk to them every day about these serious matters. Don't just call people because you think you are in their class or you're in their educational level. You're speaking with people because you know you want them to understand you and they share similar values and how you think the whole situation is moving along. But to say that you're having a group of people that are going to stand up to the system and you're going to pool with them and survive, it is not going to be that simple. Okay, it's not going to be that simple. You can build one, you can try to build one, but it doesn't mean therefore that those people might not betray you too. And you might not disagree on matters of whatever situation that they create for us to go through. All right? I hope you're understanding what I'm saying, because this is very, very important. We often think we're living in a collective, and yes, we are, but the collective is not necessarily what is going to shape you and to stand up to what is right. Many of our so-called family, and I notice I'm saying family too, family members and friends, will betray us, right? And betray common trust. Report it to the government. Police might come and get you and say, yeah, that guy doesn't want to conform. And that is how, because they want to eat. And when people have to eat, they do some of the weirdest things, right? Very good. So yes, we're saying, I agree, right? God alone will carry us through the coming hard times. Yes, and what you're saying, God, we need the community. Don't get me wrong, we still need a community, but what I'm saying to you, don't think the community is going to be whatever church you belong or whatever, school or whatever. Many of these people are not going to be on your side. Okay, that's why we have to have full confidence, as you're saying, in a higher being, in God, and also that He will lead us and give us the strength to move through. But we can also put things into proper perspective. And if you have a friend or two, don't have many. Don't think socializing with 20 people is what makes you important, right? Because oftentimes these people are not going to be there for you when the critical time it meets you, right? They're just not going to be there. They're just not going to be there. You can have many parties and go to their houses and you exchange gifts. All of that is just for fluff. It's not the real deal. It's not. It's an artificial life. Because when the rubber hits the road, you're going to realize that these people were never your friends in the first place. And some of them will wind up being your enemies. Yeah. Any other comment? Very interesting live. I think that Kevin Annett gave us some very insightful thing. We're looking at again the U.S., Israel, and the Vatican, the hidden struggle for global influence. And we're saying that the world leaders are moving us into that new world order, and we are moving every day into that global infrastructure. Okay, and it is who is more powerful that is going to survive. Even among the leaders, they're fighting against themselves, and he who stands tall and stands the strongest, he or she is the one who is going to survive. Okay. Any other comment? Anything. It doesn't have to be about the topic. It could be anything on your mind, so we can have an interactive discussion. Yeah, any news item, anything on your mind, anything you see, any insights that you have that you want to share with us. Doesn't matter what's on your mind. It doesn't matter. We share. We're here to share because that's how, even if we disagree with each other, that is, one of the things too, when we disagree with each other, sometimes what we disagree on, whether you or whether me, sometimes we have to think about it, right? Sometimes the next day you say, you know what, that person was saying was true. And I think that it has a lot of validity, even though at the moment you might think that comment was not the best, right? But our minds work that way, and that's why it's important to share disagreeing or dissenting comments, because we never know. You might say, wow, I remember when Stephen Knight on the platform said that and I did not believe him, but now look at what is happening. It's happening right before my eyes. So it's good now to share, even though, and right now too, we don't know how long this platform will last for, right? We have to also recognize that, how long they will tolerate us on their platform. We're not sure about that. So now is the time to, while we can have a dialogue, to have that dialogue. That's another thing too. We think these things are going to last forever and we'll get on platforms and begin to have dialogue and so forth. These days are fast coming to an end, where we'll not be able to come on a major platform and talk what we want to talk. We could, but not to talk openly, right? Because they won't allow it. So it's now time for us to critique the system while we can, so that we can have a full grasp of how the politics, how economics, and how religion play a vital role in our society. Remember now, the mark of the beast is going to be spiritual. It's going to be worship, right? Whoever doesn't receive the mark of the beast in his hand or forehead will be put to death. Okay, the mark of the beast has three major components. It has a political component, all right? It has a military component. It also has economic, probably I should say four, and the final is the spiritual in terms of worship. Who are you worshiping? You have to bow down to that system and worship. So that we know, it's for us now to decide who is going to be that spiritual leader that the entire world is going to call us to worship. Now, how is that going to happen? If you don't have any money, if your political leader is also worshiping that person or that system, right? If the military tells you you have to do it or you're going to be killed, right? Then you have to bow, right? Or face the consequences, right? So this is what we have to understand. This is nothing serious about justice politics and it is two countries versus one. And we have to look at all of these categories: military, economic, political, and religious. And oftentimes, too often, we just focus on the political and the economic. But we don't focus on these other two areas: the military might and the religious might. It was what's his name again? Abraham Manhattan. He's the one who says, and other people, other scholars, that the Vatican is a religious empire. Do you know what I mean by an empire? It controls a huge swath of the world, right? So here we have the United States being the what? The economic and the military empire of the world, while the Vatican is the spiritual or the religious empire of the entire globe. And if you don't believe me, check what happens in Latin America, what happens in a large section of Africa. And we like to talk about Africa, and Africa is going to be the land of freedom. But do you know the Vatican, that most Catholics are right there in Africa? Right? And where the Vatican controls a huge swath. And where the Vatican controls, it controls lands. That is one of the main things it takes when it controls a nation, a territory, a region. It ensures that it buys off a lot of the assets there. So we need to understand that. And the Vatican has never been pro-Africa. They've never been pro-Black people. In fact, during the Civil War in the United States, the Vatican was working with the Southerners, right? They were on the side of the Southerners, by the way, and they wanted to maintain slavery. Okay, so this is not a system that we should play with. Right, it's time for us to open our eyes. We know that the Vatican is also behind slavery. I did an expose on that. And the Vatican has not changed. And when you go to Latin America, where the church dominates, in Brazil, in Mexico, in all of these countries, where Black people, you go to these countries and you realize that they are at the bottom of the ladder. They can't even get into the Congress, into their nations or parliament or Congress. They can't do nothing. Right? They're just they just exist. Right? So anywhere you go in Latin America, even in Santo Domingo, in the DR, where the Vatican rules and the Catholic Church rules also, and you'd think that Dominican Republic, which has a large African, populace, that you would see a lot of these people in the Dominican Congress. They're not. Right? They're not. So you must understand that the Vatican does not play, right? And does not like dark-skinned African people, okay? But they pretend so that they can get their worship, and they send them to your schools, and and people think that is a wonderful institution, right? One of the most prestigious and institution that spreads propaganda, and people they buy the medicine, right? And they drink the wine, the Babylonian wine of the Vatican. Yeah, any other questions? Let me hear any other comments. What do you think about lockdowns? What is happening in your neck of the woods? I understand that Barbados is facing high gas prices. What about other countries in the Caribbean? Are we seeing also the hike in fuel prices in Guyana, in Barbados, in Grenada, other parts of the world, other parts of the region? All right, you're not interested in talking today, so we'll talk again. I don't think I'm going to be doing any live right now, so because you don't support the live, so it doesn't make sense my wasting my time with on the platform. So because it's wasting my time and also decreasing the momentum on the channel. So I'll just continue with my pre-recorded videos. When you're ready for lives, then I will probably change that sort of direction. But for now, I don't think I'm going to waste my time, energy on creating lives. It takes just too much energy to prepare them and to come here, and you're just very lukewarm. All right, so yeah, so all the best to you, and hopefully you can like the live and you will share it with other people and watch the recorded videos when I shall publish them. All the best to you. Bye bye.